Greetings, seekers of wisdom and lovers of Eastern traditions. Did you know that some samurai spent several hours a day in meditation before picking up a sword? Yet we often perceive them exclusively as ruthless warriors without considering the deep spiritual foundation of their life path. Today we will immerse ourselves in the amazing world of Bushido, the code of honor of Japanese warriors, and reveal the secrets of becoming a true samurai through the prism of their spiritual practices. If you are interested in Eastern philosophy, martial arts, or simply the path of self-improvement, be sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss new episodes about the amazing traditions of different cultures around the world. Now get comfortable. We are traveling to ancient Japan, where the spirit of a warrior was valued more than his sword. The word Bushido translates as the way of the warrior, and it truly was an entire path that began in early childhood. But before talking about becoming a samurai, let's understand the historical context. The samurai class formed gradually in Japan, beginning in the 8th century of our era, when landowners needed their own military force to protect their territories. By the 12th century, samurai had become the elite of Japanese society, and their code of honor became the basis for an entire life philosophy. Interestingly, the word samurai comes from the verb saburo, which means to serve, and indeed the entire life of these warriors was subordinated to service, to their lord, country, and highest ideals. Many are surprised that the spiritual development of a samurai began long before he took up weapons. Already at the age of 5 to 7 years, future warriors began studying the basics of etiquette, calligraphy, and literature. They memorized classical texts and the foundations of Confucian morality. Imagine a small child sits for hours in a motionless position, drawing characters and memorizing long passages from philosophical treatises. And this was just preparation to cultivate patience, concentration, and willpower, qualities necessary for the spiritual path of a warrior. One of the cornerstones in the spiritual formation of a samurai was the concept of mushin, the state of empty mind. Sounds simple, doesn't it? However, in practice, achieving this state required many years of persistent training. The essence of mushin was to free the consciousness from any thoughts, emotions, and prejudices, to act intuitively, without delay. Samurai practiced zazen, a form of sitting meditation during which they simply sat with a straight back and observed their breathing. Sometimes such sessions lasted several hours. At the same time, the warrior had to maintain complete immobility despite numb legs, back pain, or insect bites. This practice taught control not only of the mind, but also of the body, overcoming its weaknesses. Interestingly, for a samurai, spiritual practices were inseparable from martial arts. Eastern martial arts are not just a set of techniques for defeating an opponent, but a holistic system of human development. For example, in the art of swordsmanship, Kenjutsu, great attention was paid to the internal state of the warrior. It was believed that true mastery comes only when the sword and swordsman become one, and movements are performed without the participation of the conscious mind. To achieve such a level, samurai practiced the same strikes thousands of times, making them automatic. At the same time, they did not just mechanically repeat movements, but strive for constant improvement of technique, identifying and eliminating even the smallest mistakes. This practice was called tanrin, tempering, and it was aimed not only at developing physical skills, but also at strengthening the spirit. The philosophical foundation of Bushido became a unique combination of several religious and ethical teachings. Shintoism, the native Japanese religion, brought to the samurai code ancestor worship and loyalty to traditions. Confucianism added principles of filial piety, respect for elders, and devotion to the ruler. And Zen Buddhism taught samurai to accept life as it is, without attachment to the results of their actions. This amazing mixture of seemingly heterogeneous teachings created a unique worldview in which the warrior art and spiritual practices became two sides of the same coin. Now let's talk about one of the most famous aspects of samurai philosophy, the attitude toward death. For a Western person, it may seem strange, but samurai actively practiced awareness of their own mortality. Every morning, the warrior woke up with the thought that this day might be his last. Some even meditated, imagining various ways of their own demise, by sword, arrow, disease, or old age. This practice was called Shikitaijanken, contemplation of the body's death. Its goal was not to frighten oneself, but on the contrary, to free oneself from the fear of death, accept its inevitability, and thereby live a full life with no regrets. One samurai treatise says, The way of the samurai is a constant awareness that you can die at any moment, and this was not grim fatalism. Rather, such an approach helped to value every moment of life and always be ready to meet death with dignity. Surprisingly, samurai paid great attention to aesthetic development. The art of calligraphy, painting, poetry, tea ceremony, flower arrangement, all this was considered an important part of the warrior's path. This manifested the concept of bunbu-ryodo, the way of the brush and sword, according to which military and cultural skills should be developed equally. Samurai believed that the practice of arts develops the same qualities needed in battle: concentration, attentiveness, a sense of balance and harmony. Moreover, creative activities help the warrior cope with the emotional tension that inevitably arises in conditions of constant readiness for battle. Imagine a warrior hardened in battles who, after a bloody battle, sits down and with the same concentration with which he held the sword, takes up a brush to write a haiku about the transience of life or the beauty of blooming cherry blossoms. A special place in the spiritual practices of samurai was occupied by the concept of giri, duty or obligation. From childhood, a samurai was raised in the belief that his personal desires are always secondary to his duty to his lord, family, and society. This idea was so deeply rooted in the warrior's consciousness that it became part of his personality. To develop a sense of duty, samurai practiced peculiar psychological exercises. For example, they could promise themselves to perform some action and then strictly adhere to it, despite any difficulties. Or they voluntarily gave up something pleasant to strengthen willpower. Such practices formed a character capable of resisting temptations and weaknesses. Did you know that breathing practices were a crucial element in samurai training? The art of breath control, known as kokyuho, was used not only during meditation, but also in everyday life, and of course, in battle. Samurai learned to breathe with the abdomen, not the chest, directing energy to the body's center of gravity, the area just below the navel, which in Japan is called hara. It was believed that proper breathing helps accumulate and distribute the vital energy ki. Additionally, breath control allowed regulating one's emotional state, calming down in stressful situations, and maintaining clarity of mind. During a duel, a samurai who mastered the art of breathing could notice the moment of inhalation or exhalation of the opponent and use this for attack, since it is at these moments that concentration usually decreases. One of the fundamental concepts of Bushido was the idea of michi, the path. Samurai viewed their improvement as an endless road without a final destination. Even a master who had reached the highest level in martial arts continued to train with the same diligence as a beginner. This was the practice of shugyo, continuous self-improvement. Interestingly, such an approach is completely opposite to the modern Western model of learning, oriented toward a specific result. For a samurai, the process was more important than the result, and each achievement became just a step toward further growth. This philosophy is perfectly reflected in the Zen parable of the teacup. When a full cup cannot hold more liquid, so too a mind filled with notions of its own mastery is incapable of further learning. Self-discipline was the cornerstone in the spiritual formation of a samurai. The practice of seisin tanrin, tempering the spirit, included various methods of testing one's own limits of endurance. For example, warriors could sit under an icy waterfall in winter, remain motionless in the frost, or conversely endure heat in full attire. They could deliberately undereat or undersleep to learn to function in conditions of discomfort. These practices were aimed not at self-torture, but at knowing one's own capabilities and overcoming limitations imposed by the body. Samurai believed that true freedom comes only when a person is liberated from slavish dependence on physical comfort. In the spiritual development of a samurai, the concept of makoto, sincerity or authenticity, played a huge role. This quality implied absolute honesty before oneself and others, complete correspondence between words and actions. To develop makoto, samurai practiced self-analysis, daily evaluating their actions and thoughts in terms of conformity to the ideals of Bushido. In doing so, they strived to be impartial judges of themselves, not justifying their own misdeeds and not exaggerating achievements. Such practice required significant courage, because recognizing one's own mistakes and shortcomings is one of the most difficult tasks for the human ego. However, it was precisely through such merciless honesty that a samurai could see himself as he truly is, without illusions and self-deception. Interestingly, despite their warlike way of life, Many samurai practiced compassion and kindness. This practice was called Jin, humanity, and it was one of the most important principles of Bushido. It was believed that true strength is manifested not in cruelty, but in the ability to show mercy. Samurai trained this quality through various spiritual exercises. For example, they could take care of sick or elderly people, protect the weak, share food with those in need. In battle situations, the manifestation of Jin could be expressed in the samurai sparing an opponent if they showed courage and dignity. This practice taught warriors to see human value even in their enemies and not to succumb to blind hatred or thirst for revenge. From childhood, a future samurai was taught to control his emotions. The practice of Fudoshin, imperturbable mind, was aimed at developing the ability to maintain calmness in any circumstances. Warriors trained not to react to provocations, insults, or threats, remaining internally motionless like a rock amidst a raging sea. For this, they used various psychological techniques, for example, imagining themselves as an empty vessel through which emotions freely flow, not lingering inside, or they visualized themselves as a mountain, imperturbable in the face of a storm. This practice was especially important in combat situations when panic or anger could cost a life, but it was no less valuable in everyday life, helping to maintain clarity of thinking when making important decisions. Special attention in the spiritual development of a samurai was given to the concept of rai, etiquette or proper form of behavior. Samurai believed that the external directly influences the internal and therefore scrupulously observed rituals and ceremonies. Each movement, from the way of sitting to the manner of holding chopsticks, had its meaning and was performed with full awareness. This practice was called katachi, form, and it was aimed at developing mindfulness in everyday actions. Through observing form, the samurai learned to be fully present in each moment of life, not distracted by extraneous thoughts. From the perspective of modern psychology, this was nothing other than the practice of mindfulness, which today is actively used to combat stress and improve quality of life. Perhaps the most famous ritual of the samurai was seppuku, ritual suicide by disembowelment. This practice, horrifying from the perspective of modern people, for samurai was the highest manifestation of self-control and fidelity to their principles. Readiness to commit seppuku at any moment was cultivated from a young age and became part of the spiritual preparation of the warrior. One should not think that samurai sought death. On the contrary, they valued life, but they valued honor and fidelity to their path even more. Seppuku was an extreme measure taken to avoid disgrace or to demonstrate disagreement with an unjust decision by superiors. Interestingly, the procedure of seppuku itself was strictly regulated and represented a complex ritual in which every detail had symbolic meaning. Despite the fact that the era of samurai has long passed, their spiritual practices continue to live in modern Japanese culture. Many principles of Bushido have been adapted to peaceful life and have become the basis for corporate ethics, pedagogy, and various methods of self-development. Such concepts as continuous improvement, self-discipline, dedication to cause, and attention to detail still form the Japanese national character today. And the martial arts of samurai, transformed into modern sports, kendo, iaido, kyudo, continue to serve as an instrument of spiritual growth for millions of people around the world. Surprisingly, many spiritual practices of samurai turn out to be extremely relevant in our hectic world filled with information and stress. Mindfulness meditation, breath control, development of concentration, ability to live in the present moment. All of this modern science recognizes as effective tools for improving psychological well-being and even physical health. It turns out that ancient warriors who lived many centuries ago intuitively found those methods of working with consciousness that we are only now beginning to rediscover through scientific research. Summing up, we can say that becoming a samurai was a holistic process encompassing all aspects of life, from combat training to aesthetic education, from physical development to spiritual growth. Bushido offered not just a set of rules of behavior, but a holistic philosophy of life in which the warrior art became a path to self-knowledge and self-improvement. And although we live in a completely different era, many principles and practices of samurai can be adapted to modern life and help us become more mindful, disciplined, and purposeful. What do you think? Which of the spiritual practices of samurai seem most valuable to you for modern people? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'm very interested to know your opinion. If this topic interested you, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell to not miss new episodes. And if the video seemed useful to you, share it with friends. Perhaps they will also be interested in immersing themselves in the world of Eastern wisdom. In upcoming episodes, we will continue to explore the amazing traditions of different cultures and discover new paths to self-knowledge and personal growth. Remember, the journey of 1,000 li begins with a single step. Until next time,